This is section 4, talking about different types of protists. And all these pictures here are representing different types, and we'll kind of walk through them a little bit more detail here coming up. So basic structure of protists are that they're unicellular, so just one cell, but they are eukaryotes, meaning they have a nucleus, and that nucleus contains their genetic material. And they have something called endoplasm, which is basically just cytoplasm. It helps to maintain their shape. And they also have a food vacuole. It's like their little stomach. So it contains all kinds of enzymes that are going to help them digest nutrients and all the stuff that they eat and bring into the cell. And then they also have something called a contractile vacuole. And contractile vacuoles help them remove all the extra water that they're taking in. And that they don't necessarily need to keep inside of them. So a lot of times protists live in water, and so we have to be able to get that out of them. So there's 3 types of protists. The first are animal-like. We call them protozoa. So they're heterotrophs, which means they have to feed on other things to get their energy. And 2 examples of those would be like the amoeba and the paramecium. And this is a picture of an amoeba here off to the right. Plant-like protists are autotrophs, so therefore they can go through photosynthesis and make their own food. They're going to have chlorophyll, which is going to make them kind of green in color. So examples of that would be algae, and this guy over here, this is a volvox. So it's still unicellular, but it's kind of a cool spinning, rotating group of, or I guess one big giant cell, but it looks like a group of cells. And then the last kind is the fungi-like protists, and they're also heterotrophs, so again, they have to feed on something else to get their energy. And most of the time, these are going to be your decomposers. So this picture here off to the right is showing a slime mold. It basically can be found on dead, decaying stuff on forest floors, and it literally disintegrates them and turns them into mush. So the animal-like protists, called protozoa, they have different ways that they can move. The first would be a flagella, which is the long whip-like tail, and it spins like a boat motor propeller. So again, steering's a little bit hard to do. Another way is cilia, which are the little hairs that kind of do a nice rhythmic sweeping motion in unison, and so therefore it can kind of help move the cell in one direction, propelling it through the water. It's basically like swimming. And then the last way is pseudopodia, and pseudo in Latin means false, and pod means foot, so it's literally like a false foot. It's where they take some of their cytoplasm, they push it out forward, and then they'll inch the rest of themselves to catch up with that. So they kind of slowly inch their way forward. So like we said, most protists are going to be found in water, and they're going to feed on bacteria and other protists that are living in that water. And how do they get them in? They use a process called endocytosis. So cyte is cell, osis is the process of, and endo is within. So it's the process of bringing something into a cell. And this picture down at the bottom is showing that happen. So whatever this amoeba is trying to eat here, it's too big to get through the membrane. So instead, the whole membrane wraps around that, and we basically engulf it and bring the whole thing in, and then the enzymes inside in that food vacuole are going to help digest this whole structure entirely. So that's endocytosis. Protists are also going to reproduce asexually, so they're going to make exact copies of themselves using that process that we talked about in previous chapters called binary fission. So basically just splitting into 2. Quick copying of the DNA and then a quick replication and splitting in half. And then they get rid of any extra waste through exocytosis. So it's the exact opposite of what we just talked about with endocytosis. So instead of bringing it in, we would take our waste, push it out towards the cell membrane, and then release it to the outside. All right, let's talk about a couple different types of protists. One of the harmful one is called amoebiasis. It is actually transmitted through feces or fecal matter. It can stay dormant for a long period of time, which means dormant meaning it's just kind of hanging out in like feces on the ground, but it's still very active. So it can be a long period of time before then somebody accidentally touches that feces and now they've touched their face and now it's in their body. So once it gets into the body, lots of problems can happen. It can cause diarrhea, bloody stool, or vomiting. So pretty rough stuff. It infects the liver, And this is really common in third world countries that don't really have good sanitation going on. So like maybe they're going to the bathroom in the streets or just kind of wherever they feel like it. And so people come into contact with that fecal matter pretty easily and they're getting pretty sick. So amoebiasis is just one of those protists. Another type of protist is malaria, and malaria is actually caused by something called a plasmodium. It's transmitted through mosquito saliva, and specifically just the female mosquitoes. Again, it's going to infect your liver cells, and once it gets in the liver, all your blood kind of cycles through that organ, and so what it starts to do is infect your red blood cells specifically. And red blood cells carry oxygen for us, so if we're messing with that, we can actually get a condition called anemia. It's where your body just doesn't transmit the amount of oxygen it needs to survive. Tissues can start to waste away. The person can feel really weak and kind of get pale in color. Other symptoms, fever would go with this, vomiting, convulsions, which are like muscle spasms and the body starts shaking. And then worst case scenario, it could lead to coma or death. So malaria is a pretty rough disease. Obviously, this is found in regions that have very high mosquito populations. So a lot of those tropical regions where mosquitoes are very prevalent and they like to get the blood from people. So as soon as they bite the person, unfortunately, this protist that was in their saliva gets into the body, starts wreaking havoc. So, all right, and that's it for section 3. Or excuse me, 4.